Now, to do this also, we often use what's called an index. And you may have heard of this. You may have heard of the Consumer Price Index or the Producer Price Index. And these are indices. And economists like working on indices. They're easy to calculate in terms of inflation. And so we use an index instead of actually reporting the actual amount spent. Because to be quite honest, if we were reporting the actual amount spent, we'd be looking at millions of euros probably. It'd just be a huge number to do the calculation on. So we try to simplify things by creating an index. And to do that, we have to select what's called a base year. The base year here is, and this is exactly what you see in this text here, is that a base year is defined as 100. It's a year that's fixed. We usually fix a base year as a year that ends in 0. So 2000, 2010, 2020 are typical base years. And what's nice about an index number is it's unit free. It means we're not talking about euros or dollars or anything like that. We're going to produce an index that has no currency sign attached to it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if we go back to our previous example, we've got the amount that we've calculated. We know this is how much we spent. Right here, right here, and right here. And to calculate the index, we're going to first choose our base year. So let's say our base year is 2017. So we're going to choose our base year as 2017. And that means what we're going to do is we're going to take the amount we spend every year, here, here, and here, and we're going to divide it by that amount in the base year. So the index here is going to be quite simple. It's going to be 148 divided by 148, the amount in the base year, times 100. Well, that's just 1 times 100. That's going to equal 100. Here, what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing. We've got 158.50. We're going to divide it by the value in the base year, 148. And we're going to multiply that all by 100. And here again, we've got 171. We divide by 148. And we multiply by 100. So let's bring in our trusty calculator again and see what this gives us. We have 158.50 divided by 148. And that equals, yes, 107, because we multiplied by 100. And if we take it, our last one, we have 171 divided by 148. And that gives us 115,116. Now, to calculate inflation, well, we've moved from 100 to 107. That's pretty easy. We've gone up 7%. And as we move from 107 to 116, how much have we gone up? Well, again, let's do the calculation. 116 divided by 107. 8%. Not a surprise because we've already calculated that in the previous way of calculating the inflation rate. So we got 8%. Now you can see the obvious benefit of using an index is that when we're in the base year, as we move from the base year to the next year, we can see immediately that it's just the movement from 100 to whatever the value is of the index. So that's the Consumer Price Index, and we've chosen a base year of 2017. Now, you can do it another way. You can choose a base year of 2018. You'd be divided by this value here at 158.50. Okay, so let's see if I've not screwed this up entirely. So we'll see if my math has paid off. And yes, it has. We come up with our 107 and 116 value that I've had back here. So we've taken inflation, we've calculated for a basket of goods and services. We've created an index, a consumer price index, using these three simple values, and we've also weighted them by the quantity, obviously. The consumer price index is thus a measure of inflation that we use as economists to measure inflation, and it represents the average consumer's purchases. In France, we refer to it as the IPC, Indice de Prix de la Consommation. And there's two things that you need to keep in mind, is that this consumer price index can overestimate inflation. The actual inflation that we feel as consumers may be much less than what this is telling us. So why do you think it's less? What are some potential reasons? Well, let me try to explain that to you very quickly. The first reason is that as the price of a good increases, what do you do? Well, if the price rises of a product that's in that basket that's been defined by the statisticians, and we don't like changing the basket from year to year. If we change what's in the basket, we can't really measure inflation. So we fix the basket, prices go up of one of the products in the basket. What do? Well, you'll buy something else. You'll change the basket. If the price of Coke goes up or cola goes up in general, well, you'll stop buying cola and start buying, I don't know, lemonade. So we move away from the more expensive goods, and we substitute away from them, and we buy less expensive goods. But the price index still looks at the price of Coke, even though nobody buys Coke anymore. So it's telling us that prices are going up, but in fact, well, not really for us, because we're not buying Coke, we're buying lemonade. So that's the first way that this is an overestimate of really what we feel as consumers. The second is a product quality bias. Now, what happens over time is that prices rise, and we've seen this already. But we can also note that over time, the quality of goods goes up. When you have a phone prices are rising, but the features you have on your phone are also getting better. So product quality can rise, and as product quality rises, prices are getting higher as well. So we're paying more, but we're getting more benefit. It's not really the same product. Yeah, we're buying, a box of cereal, maybe, or a box of juice, but maybe the juice has got more pulp in it, or maybe we have a better way of producing juice, or it's a better taste, or something. But over time, if prices are rising, maybe we're getting more for our money. And again, the price index will say, "Ooh, inflation is going up," but we're getting more for it. So it's overestimating really the impact of price changes. So those are two very simple ways to see that the price index is not always a great reflection of inflation impact on people, and it will overestimate price rises. Now again, as I mentioned, we tend not to change what's in the consumer price index, the basket of goods. It can be adjusted now and then, but we don't like changing it because it screws up our measurement of inflation over time. So let's go on to the next item. This is the release of what's called the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices by the European Union. So the European Union fixes a way of measuring their price index, the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, across all European countries so we can compare the inflation rates from one country to the next. And it's not a surprise that there are certain weights, and I mentioned this to you before, is that we want to consider some goods as being more important in our overall price index, because it's something we do a lot of. And so you can see here that in January, specifically in January, if you look this number up on Eurostat, they will give you the weights for the year. And here we have the weights for 2020. Well, what are the weights and what does it represent? Well, we can see right away that alcohol and processed foods represent about 15%, unprocessed foods about 4%, energy is about 10%, industrial goods 26%, and no surprise here, services represent 45% of the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices in European countries today. So this is a nice statistic to get your hands on if you ever want to know, again, well, what goes in it and what's the weight of goods. Always look for the January release, and this is released monthly by Eurostat.